Well, the UCF staff is officially set. What do I think about all the hires, and are they the right hires for the UCF Knights? Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Charge On. As always, I'm your host, Sean Green. Before we get started, a quick word from our sponsor, Bet Online. The biggest betting weekend of the year is finally here, which means more updated odds and props for Super Sunday. Bet Online is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. We have hundreds of prop bets, MVP odds, and exclusive in-game live betting. BetOnline is your ultimate game day companion. Whether you're a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor, BetOnline offers you everything and more to enhance your game day experience. Visit the website today and make game day action count a little bit more. BetOnline, the game starts here. Guys, listen, we've been knocking these out. We've gone through a good chunk of the offense. Offensive line is going to be on Tuesday. About 18 guys that we need to talk to. Trying to figure out a way to condense that to make it a little bit more watchable for you all. But Nick's not on, obviously. He was out car shopping late today and didn't make it back in time. So you get solo Sean today. And I kind of wish Nick was here, to be honest, because with these coaching hires and stuff, we've talked about a good chunk of them, if we're being honest, on the podcast. And some of these we won't go too much in depth, because again, like I said, we talked about them. So if you want to go get more in-depth thoughts on some of these guys, go back. But we will give some brief thoughts on the guys we've already talked about. This is a good opportunity to talk about all of the coaches that have been hired to the UCF Knights staff. And you know, I have some opinions on some. Others, I have really great opinions. But let's just get started. Obviously, it starts with the guy at the top, Scott Frost. Now, we got a lot of heat, or, a fair amount of heat. Once Scott Frost got hired, we dropped the video. And we were a little negative, maybe more negative than most. Just talking about that, usually these type of hires don't look great in the long run. They end up not working out, and that still might happen. But me and Nick then hopped on a podcast about, 5 days later, after the opening right after the opening press conference, and we were sold. And when you're sold in an opening press conference, it's one thing, but it's the actions you take place after. And listen, at the end of the day, it's what's going to be on the field. But so far, so good for the Scott Frost era and what he's meant to do. Now, these are Scott's choices that we're about to go through. And some of them were a little suspect. I'm not talking for Nick. I'm giving you my opinion, but I've really enjoyed the Scott Frost tenure up to this point. I liked a lot of the hires, and I've liked what they're doing in recruiting. They're kind of going again, like they're going after some big fish. And we'll get to some of the coaches that are associated with big fish in recruiting. But they're also going for those underviewed guys that maybe just don't have the offer sheet that Gus was going for. So it is interesting. If you want to hear all our thoughts on Scott Frost, I'll link those down below. It's the minute he got hired and his press conference directly after. We hopped on a pod directly after that. So go check out for full thoughts on Scott Frost. Go check that out. But Steve Cooper, offensive coordinator. I'm going to talk about the main coordinators first, and then we'll go into the offensive staff and defensive staff. But Steve Cooper, I already gave my thoughts, but like I said on one of the previous pods, this is the clear-cut hire guy that give him the OC title, but is not really the OC. This is Gus Malzahn 2.0. Scott Frost is going to be the offensive coordinator. He's going to be the one calling plays. And I think that's what UCF fans want. Whereas at the end with Gus, nobody wanted Gus calling plays, right? So it's one of those things where you want Scott Frost because of the offense that he runs, because of the things that he does on offense. Getting a guy like Steve Cooper coming from Boise State, I think he could have learned a lot in this past year. He hasn't had a ton of Power 4 experience. I think this is a good opportunity for him. He's kind of moved up those ranks. And this is a really good opportunity for him to learn. I don't see him being in this role very long, because, again, this is really a role for him to learn from Scott Frost, learn what kind of he wants to take from this experience, and then go get a different type of job, maybe a group of 5 job, being a really actual offensive coordinator and being able to call plays. Because this opportunity for him is strictly to learn. And I'm sure he could bring some good insight. It's not just about learning, obviously. As an offensive coordinator, he still has the title. I think this is going to be a really good opportunity to really teach a lot of the offense to a lot of these guys, and use it as an opportunity to teach a lot of these younger players that maybe just need a little bit of wisdom on the offense, especially the receivers, the receiving room, as we talked about on the last podcast. So that's Steve Cooper. The one that we've already talked about a lot is, sorry about that, Alex Grinch. Alex Grinch, and we've already, like I said, we've already given our full thoughts on Alex Grinch. I will link that video down below. I don't want to say too much on this podcast because we said a lot on the Alex Grinch episode. It was specifically for him. Months after, not months, basically a month. Still don't love it. I'm not really looking forward to it. It's one of those things where when everybody doesn't like something, usually there's a reason. When the college football world comes around on one idea that says we don't like this person in this type of role, and I don't know why UCF would do this, that was what the Alex Grinch hire was for UCF. Now, it could work out. Like he went to a couple different spots. It might be able to work out. Who knows? But boy, that is one thing I am a little skeptical about, is the defense and how it's going to kind of come together, because Alex Grinch's defenses have not been good. He had really good years in the mid 2015, 2016, 2017s, and then fell off a cliff. But like I said, I think it's going to be, he has a lot of experience with the Big 12. He knows kind of the Big 12. He has an idea of how he likes his defenses. So it's going to be, what did he learn in these past couple years that will make him be able to step in to this role and be way better than he was at USC or Oklahoma, for that matter. He really struggled in his last couple years at Oklahoma. So that is our thoughts on Alex Grinch. If you want to go check out more on that, we have a podcast for that. But Pete Alamar, special teams. Glowing review on him. He's coached a lot of guys. Christian McCaffrey comes to mind. A couple tight ends like Zach Ertz. He's obviously had a lot of experience coaching up special teams. And I think that's going to be the biggest improvement this year, is going to be in the special teams. Obviously, offense, I'm assuming there's going to be a big jump, just given having Scott Frost come in. I'm really looking forward to seeing what he's learned. But I think having Pete Alamar run the special teams is going to see a massive jump. And you're going to see those young guys that were on special teams last year. It's going to get some of those guys just even more prepared on work ethic, learning from a guy like him who has that experience. So I am looking forward to seeing him take on that role. I'm excited to talk with him when we get the chance in spring and pick his brain a little bit and what he kind of views as a crucial part of the special teams operation, not just on the special teams kickoffs and punts, right? But in the actual kicking game, because that has also been something that UCF has struggled with. Colton Boomer struggled. Grant Reddick struggled. So I am going to be really interested to see how big of a jump that the kicking game can improve. All right, let's get into the offensive staff. Sean Beckton Sr., associate head coach and wide receiver coach. Listen, we all know Sean Beckton. If you go through, played for UCF Hall of Famer, we know Sean Beckton. He's been coaching at UCF basically his entire coaching profession. The only time he really left UCF really to be like an actual coach was to follow Scott Frost to Nebraska. He was there from 2018 to 2022 to coach the tight ends there. He coached tight ends at UCF in the Scott Frost years from 2016 and 2017. I love this hire. Like with some of these positions, You have to understand, like, I don't view it like it's a two-way street. You want to have a guy that can really recruit well and bring guys in, but you also want a guy that knows how to develop players. That's some of the coaches on here. That's been a thing that's lacked, is they can recruit, but they can't develop. What's the reason that probably Gus Malzahn is at Florida State right now? And that's a main reason. You can have all the talented guys in the world that you want, but at the end of the day, if they come in and you can't develop them, they're either A, going to leave, or B, they're not going to end up being the player that they were touted to be. You're seeing that kind of with, the Senior Bowl, and we'll talk about the Senior Bowl probably next week, because we are close to a Big 12 schedule. And once that drops, we will drop an emergency pod talking about the schedule. But, I mean, you look at B.J. Adams and you look at Mac McWilliams, and we saw glimpses, right? We looked at Mac McWilliams and said, he's a pretty good corner. But it just didn't look like it was on the field. And I think when they're at the Senior Bowl and they're kind of showing out, it makes you be like, wow, look at all the talent and look at where the development of that talent really went. It might show in the Senior Bowl, but it didn't show out on the field. So I think for Sean Beckton and the wide receivers, this is a really young room, like we said. I think it's a really good opportunity. He was on staff last year, not in an actual coaching role, but an analyst role. I think for him to stay on staff, become a wide receivers coach and the associate head coach, I think it's really big for a lot of these wide receivers in that room, but also coming out of high school that can really look at him and know he's done it and get a lot of advice from Sean Beckton. So I really like that hire for UCF. Mackenzie Milton, quarterback coach. Again, I sound like a broken record, but we did a full-on Mackenzie Milton episode of what it means with him on the staff. So go check that out. But I will say, again, still thrilled that he is on the staff. I think it's a huge recruiting tool right now, especially. They're looking at a lot of quarterbacks in the next couple of years. They're sending Mackenzie, it looks like, wherever and anywhere that there is really good quarterback talent. So I'm excited to see the development. Number one, that's going to be a huge thing. How big, and like if you're looking at a Dylan Risk, if you're looking at a Taven Jackson, what can Mackenzie Milton do to improve their games from spring to fall to the season? I think that's going to be a really big thing to watch. I don't have any information on if we get to watch practices or any of that stuff. But if we do, that's going to be something I'm definitely watching out for, is how much better do the quarterbacks get under Mackenzie Milton's coaching from spring to fall. The one I'm probably most excited for is Sean Clark. I'm not gonna lie. When you hire a former head coach, and not just like a head coach that stunk like Ted Roof, right? But a head coach that specialized in one specific thing, was an offensive line coach for a majority of his career. 40-24 at App State. Is 3-1 in bowl games. And he's been coaching offensive line. He coached at Eastern Kentucky for 5 years from 2003 to 2008. Coached the Purdue offensive line from 2009 to 2012. Went and coached the Kent State offensive line from 2013 to 2015. Then went back and went to App State, where he played football as an offensive lineman from 2016 to 2018 as the co-OC and offensive line coach, and then became the App State head coach in 2020. Was coached under Scott Satterfield, Eli Drinkowitz at one point. Like, Sean Clark has learned from so many football minds. He was a successful head coach. Like, he didn't have a good season last year. I don't think he should have been fired. I think Sean Clark is a really decent head coach. He proved it at App State. Look at all the players that were in the portal from App State that other teams wanted. I think for the offensive line, and I like Herb Hand, don't get me wrong. Herb Hand is a great coach, a great human being. But I think in terms of development and the offensive line specifically, this was the number one grade A++ hire that Scott Frost made in the entire cycle. Because you just got a guy that has all the experience, knows how to recruit, maybe. And listen, you look at App State, and it's not like they're recruiting 4-star guys. And you looked at Herb Hand, and he started towards the end of his time at UCF kind of getting those high-profile guys, right? Like Walt Claire Flynn. And I'm forgetting the guy's name that we had committed, and he just committed to Florida State, 6'9", Chasten Brown, right? He started towards the end of his UCF career to kind of start getting those guys to commit. But all of the underutilized talent you looked at, and they weren't really his guys. And when they were his guys, he was definitely a really good coach and made a lot of guys way better and worked with a lot less than maybe he should have. But it's all about recruiting and developing. I think Herb Hand did a really good job, but I think Sean Clark is definitely a step up. And you can't say that about all the position coaches, because there's some that we'll get into in a second that I think are a step down. Sean Clark, I think, is a step up. And I like Herb Hand, but I think Sean Clark is definitely a step up in that offensive line room. Now let's talk about a coach that I like the hire, but I think is a step down in terms of fanfare and in coaching in general. But Jimmy Beal is the new running back coach, played at Montana State. He's been coaching for a long time. Don't get me wrong. He's been coaching for a good chunk of time. He was the Northern Arizona coach from 2010 to 2018 at running back. He coached Montana State from 2020 to 2022. He was the San Diego State running back coach in 2023 and the Utah State running back coach in 2024. Utah State obviously had one of the top running backs in the country that also entered the portal. Listen, there's nothing against Jimmy Beal. I'm excited to see the development of all of the running backs that are on the roster right now. We went through them all. I think this is going to be a huge year for Tavion Swint with Jimmy to see how he can develop. Miles Montgomery, to see him kind of take that stride to be a potential number one back. My thing is Cam Martin was beloved by every running back in the room. And he was a young, up-and-coming, heavy hitter coach that recruited better than most in the country. And that's a fact. He got Tavion Swint to commit. He got a bunch of guys to commit. Cam Martin was the guy here. And I think when he wasn't retained, there was a thought process of, okay, well, you're going to go get Kevin Smith. Like, that's going to be your new running back coach. Kevin Smith's going to come home, and he's going to be the new running back coach. Obviously, Ole Miss is paying him a lot of money. I'm sure there was a lot of conversations about that happening, but it did not work out. This just feels like one of those things where you need to make a hire. And not that Jimmy Beal doesn't deserve the opportunity. I think with his experience, I think he could do a really good job. It's just something that's not been proven yet. And I think it's a really good opportunity for him to prove that in his recruiting and in his development. Like, if you see some of these running backs take a huge leap this year, that's all Jimmy Beal. Because realistically, the only running back on this roster, or only two that coached or was under Cam Martin, was Miles Montgomery and Stacey Gage. Right? So this running back room is now Jimmy Beal's, and it's going to be up to him to really get these running backs up to standard and up to what they need to be in a Scott Frost offense. Because it's going to look different than what it was under Gus. It's going to. It's not going to be an RJ Harvey show, because UCF doesn't have an RJ Harvey anymore. So I am excited and intrigued, really, to see Jimmy Beal in that role. But I do feel like it is a step down from a young, up-and-coming Cam Martin. Let's talk strength and conditioning coach Zach Duval. I don't want to spend too much time on it. He's a Scott Frost guy through and through, because he is an alum of Nebraska. So he actually was at UCF. He was from Buffalo in 2010 to 2013 as their strength and conditioning coach. Coached or was working with Khalil Mack during that time. I think that is something to note. He was the director of sports performance at UCF for both the Scott Frost years, and then he went to Nebraska in 2018, 2022. I don't think he had an actual job in college football since 2022. I think he had his own business. He kind of worked on that. I'm not exactly sure, but in my research, I know he does have his own business and stuff, so I'm sure he just took a couple years off, and then Scott got this job and obviously followed him. Listen, I think he was the defensive line, or I can't remember exactly. I'm pretty sure he was just director of sports performance for UCF. I'm pretty sure. But listen, if you looked at UCF's defense and offense and the weight room and all that stuff, I think you feel confident about him coming in and be able to take that over. I've already seen some pictures of the guys working out. Some of the guys you can definitely tell have already kind of put on a little bit of muscle that you just didn't see. We're going to see a lot of that in spring, get the updated weight on all of the guys. But I'm sure he'll do a good job. And for a Nebraska alum, listen, he did coach at Nebraska with Scott Frost, but come back to UCF where he did coach for a couple years is, I think, in my opinion, a really good hire for Scott Frost. All right, let's go to the defensive side of the football. Mike Dawson is your new run game coordinator and edge coach. Mike Dawson's been a lot of places. And I think here's the trend that we've been talking about a good chunk, that Scott Frost did hire a lot of people that he's worked with before. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. There are a lot of people that were on his Nebraska staffs. So you have, like Mike Dawson, he coached the defensive line in 2016 and 2017. And the defensive line for UCF in those years was really good. He coached in Nebraska in 2020 to 2022. He was at Ohio State and Kansas these last 2 years as a defensive analyst or defensive assistant. So, yeah, I like the hire. He's now going to be coaching edge and, again, the run game coordinator. He has a couple years of NFL experience coaching with the Eagles and the Giants. I like it because he was successful here the last time at UCF. But we come full circle a little bit and we start seeing the trends, like I said, about coaching with Scott Frost before, having success, now getting rehired here. I want to see how he works with some of these guys because some of these guys really need to take leaps. Malachi Lawrence is a name that you really looked at and you said, where did Malachi Lawrence go? He was poised for a breakout year. He had a decent year, but it could have been a lot better. So where does he go from here? You look at a guy like Isaiah Nixon. And Isaiah Nixon, in my opinion, looked like one of the best edge, if not the best edge on the roster. And then obviously you bring back a lot of other guys in that room that are going to be crucial. So I'm excited to see what he can do. Again, it's TBD, but he has shown enough in his years of coaching that you feel confident about him coming in and doing some good things with that room. All right, Brandon Harris. This is probably my favorite hire on the defensive side. And the reason being is, again, recruiting development. I've already seen a little bit of noise in the recruiting world with Brandon Harris. Played at Miami when he was actually playing, went to the NFL, played for the Texans, Titans, and Dolphins. Love to see it. Was the cornerback coach at FIU in 2021. Had a lot of different roles at FAU from 2022 to 2024. But now he comes over to UCF to coach the DBs. I think he's going to be the coach that you look at in a year from now and say that the most development is going to be in the DB room. And I think he's going to be one of those coaches that we're looking at saying that's the next big coach for UCF on the defensive side of the ball. He's already kind of, like I said, making strides in recruiting with 4-star guys, which I tried to say, like, it's going to be a culture shock for UCF fans when you're not going to be going after a lot of 4-star guys. I'm sure they still will, and they're showing that they still do, but it's not going to be to the level that Gus and the other staff was. But a lot of DBs, I've already seen a couple that are 4-star guys that said Brandon Harris is their guy. They love him. So if you're UCF, that is a really good hire. You need high-quality, high-end DB talent to commit. There's a lot in the state. He played in the state. It's, I think, the best possible movement when you lose a guy like Addison Williams, who was a good recruiter. He was a really good recruiter. And you also lose Coach Trevon Reed, and that's a huge loss too. Like Trevon Reed, I said you really want to be able to retain him. He's now at USC. So I think for all intents and purposes, this was a good replacement hire. This is a really good hire to come in and coach up the DBs. We'll see if there's improvement in that room. Because again, like I said, there are a lot of younger guys that have high-end talent. have high-end talent there. And I think if they can get a coach to coach them up really good, as we saw, Trovon and Addison Williams clearly did a good job with Mac McWilliams and B.J. Adams. They're doing really good in Mobile. So I hope that Brandon Harris can do the exact same thing. All right, this is the one that everybody wants me to talk about. Mark D'Onofrio. Coaching the linebackers, was the Miami defensive coordinator from 2011 to 2015. Was the Houston defensive coordinator from 2017 to 2018. Coach at Wisconsin in 2022 as their inside linebacker coach, and was at Stanford the last couple years coaching inside linebackers there. Obviously, we all know Mark D'Onofrio, especially in the state. Those Miami defenses were really bad. Like, let's just call it like it is. It's like Alex Grinch. If you put Alex Grinch and Mark D'Onofrio together, it's like, what are we doing? Here's my take. Do I think it's a good hire? No. I don't. I think they could have gotten somebody with a little bit more upside. But you can't take away the experience that Mark D'Onofrio has in the coaching world. Has it been good experience? Not at a lot of the last stops. But positive is he's not the defensive coordinator. That's Alex Grinch. So you can only blame Alex Grinch for any issues. Now, to that point, though, linebacker has been an area of concern for UCF in recent years. Last year, it did take a little bit of a step up. You weren't looking at the linebackers as the problem in most of the games, whereas the year previously, it was all we could talk about. You thought the linebackers did take a step up last year. Not all of them, but a good chunk of them. Mark D'Onofrio coaching linebackers does scare me a little bit. One of the things that has been kind of looked at for him as a coach is the development aspect. Has he been a good developer? Is he really just set in his ways and only finds a certain player or player type that can play in his defense? Making certain players put on weight because it, again, fits what he wants, but ultimately, is it best for the player? And then again, in the recruiting aspect, there's a lot of bad stories from players that frankly just don't like him as a person and don't like him as a coach. That stuff can scare you. And that's where I don't love the hire. I would have gone with a younger up-and-coming guy. I don't think him or Scott Frost have interacted in any way. I want to ask. I think this is more of an Alex Grinch move. And again, I don't know if they knew each other from any other spot, but that is definitely something that I'm looking forward to asking Coach Frost when we get the opportunity. But I don't love the move. I don't love the move, but I would hate it a lot more if he was the defensive coordinator. I think this is going to be a 1 year. We'll see. Put him out there. Let's see if the linebackers get better. And the worst that can happen is the linebackers don't get better. They look bad. And then you find a new linebacker coach. I think this is a really good waiver on a coach with a lot of experience to say, what can you do with this group and can you make them improve? There's a lot of young guys in that room. You signed a lot through the transfer portal. We'll talk about them in a week or two. Can we see improvement? And has he learned anything in these last couple of years at Wisconsin and Stanford, coaching up those linebackers? So we'll see. But if your question is, Sean, would you have made that hire? I would have said, no, I'd stay away. But that's just me. And our last guy, Kenny Martin. I said that my favorite was Brandon Harris. I think my favorite was keeping Kenny Martin on staff because he's proven he's an elite recruiter. He's an elite coach coming up. He's done UCF so much good with all the commitments that he's gotten by himself. John Walker being obviously the number one that you can kind of pinpoint. I'm excited to see what he can do. Continue with those guys, to continue to develop them. I think this is a big, huge year for a guy like John Walker. He's going to be the guy in that room, basically. And he's going to need to take a major step up, especially coming off of an injury. There's going to be a lot put on his shoulders. And there's nobody else I'd rather have in the room than a guy like Kenny Martin. Because you can definitely feel players trust him, players want to play for him. And I think UCF needed a little bit of that stability right now. because it is a completely new staff. And I think a little bit of familiarity is going to go a long way. They lost so many important pieces in that staff. And obviously, it's a new coach. It's a new head coach. It always happens like that. But for Kenny Martin to impress and for him to get to stay on the staff and continue working at UCF is a huge win for Scott Frost. I think he'll realize that, and he probably does realize it already with some of the work that he does in the recruiting and how much better the defensive line, and especially the defensive tackles, are. He made Lee Hunter a lot of money. Ricky Barber, he made look really good. And John Walker in his first season looked really good as well. So hopefully we'll see a lot more gains in that room as well. All right, everybody, that's going to do it for the UCF coaching staff. Who do you like? Who do you not like? Drop down in the comments. We're going to find out a lot in the next however many months. Spring ball is basically just a month away in March. And I know a lot of you are bummed about the no spring game. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of news coming out about potential ways that you can see the team in spring. That's going to be a kind of topic we'll talk about in February at some point, about the spring game getting canceled and all that stuff. But I get where it can be disappointing, but I'm sure you guys are all going to get an opportunity to watch the Knights in spring at some point. But with that being said, thank you so much for tuning in. As always, please like, subscribe, comment, share, do all that you do. We greatly, greatly appreciate it. Next week, like I said, Tuesday, offensive tackles. We love to talk about it, right? So we'll get more into Sean Clark with Nick, see what his thoughts on him are on all of the offensive linemen. And then I haven't decided which first defensive position group we're going to go to. It might be linebackers, but we will see. All right, everybody, thank you so much. This has been Charge On, presented by Bet Online. We will see you next week.